It happened. Syrskyi announced the AFU are going on the counteroffensive, the masks are off. The commander-in-chief delivered Putin a deadly ultimatum. This will be a knockout. Syrskyi revealed his main trump card. This was what the general staff feared most of all. Watch for all the details.
While the civilized world hopes for negotiations, the armed forces of Ukraine harbor no illusions and are preparing for a new round of war. Ukraine intends not only to hold the line, but also to regain the initiative on the battlefield.
We see the enemy's days. We do not see a victim, but a sign. We see the enemy's actions, and we see no signs that they are preparing for any peace negotiations, initiatives, or actions on the battlefield. On the contrary, we see the opposite. An increase in the intensity of hostilities and a buildup of the enemy's offensive groupings, as well as an increase and expansion in the production of strike weapons, missiles, and drones.
The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, stated in an interview with LBUA that it is impossible to win this war by defense alone. It is impossible to win this war. That is why the general staff is already laying out the strategy for a new offensive operation. According to Syrskyi, Russia's strategic goal remains unchanged. The occupation of all of Ukraine, only the timelines, available resources, and the amount of weaponry at the Kremlin's disposal at each stage of the war change. Directly to their formidable enemies.
We will actively carry out strategic offensive operations and strive relentlessly to maintain our critical operational initiative, because this effectively compels the enemy forces to commit and withdraw significant human resources, as well as weapons and ammunition, in their attempt to contain our ongoing active military actions.
The logic of the general staff is simple. Offensive actions do not necessarily mean a large-scale advance forward, but they do deprive the enemy of freedom of maneuver, force them to redeploy reserves, and weaken them in other sectors of the front. This is exactly how Ukraine plans to wear down the Russian army, imposing its own tempo of war.
Ukraine's victory means that Ukraine has successfully disrupted those specific plans.
Orchestrated by the leadership in Moscow. Those strategic Russian military objectives that explicitly envisioned and detailed the total and complete elimination of Ukrainian statehood, and the full-scale occupation of the entire territory. It is Russia's fundamental inability and failure to successfully accomplish and secure such a victory, one that was explicitly proclaimed and declared by Putin himself, and is actively endorsed and supported by a very significant part of Russian society. This, in my view, is what constitutes Ukraine's victory.
2026. Nothing changes with Orpheus, and Russia's approach is still not about efficiency, but about sheer numbers. According to Syrskyi, the mobilization potential of the aggressor country exceeds 20 million people, of whom 4.5 million are already a trained reserve. This year, Moscow plans to conscript more than 409,000 people, simultaneously forming new divisions and replenishing losses, which have already exceeded 850,000 over the past 2 years of war.
No less, not lower. No fewer than 11 divisions for this year. And of course, the continuation of carrying out plans and tasks that were not completed last year.
However, even with this approach, the aggressor faces serious limitations. According to the Ukrainian command, despite large-scale mobilization, the number of enemy assault groups at the front remains almost unchanged. This is all due to the colossal losses, which deplete resources faster than they can be replenished. It is precisely this that derailed Moscow's plans to form fully-fledged reserve armies and forced them to throw fresh meat into patching up already existing sections of the front.
Part of the strategic reserve. Do you remember that they planned to form 14 divisions? They formed no more than half, and even that only partially. And these resources were used to make up for losses.
But the Kremlin's main bet is not just on numbers. Russia is rapidly ramping up the production of strike drones and plans to reach the use of up to 1,000 drones per day. This means a change in the very logic of the war. Even greater depth of strikes, constant pressure on the rear, and new challenges for Ukrainian air defense and the front as a whole. At the same time, Syrskyi emphasizes that 2025 has not become a year of defeats for Ukraine. Russia has not managed to achieve any of its strategic objectives, neither a breakthrough deep into Ukraine, nor the encirclement of key cities, nor a breach of the defenses.
The opposing enemy forces have not been able to successfully carry out or fulfill even a single one of their strategic plans. Do you remember exactly how many bold and incredibly loud public statements there were about them rapidly finishing and concluding this entire special military operation? Before the summer even? Or, for example, before the new year? There were a lot of such statements. I remember just in certain directions there were 6 or 7. Offensives were being planned. They had very ambitious plans to seize our state. But none of those plans came to fruition. They
had very ambitious plans to capture our country, but none of those plans were realized. But an even more difficult stage lies ahead. The war is increasingly turning into a competition of economies and technologies, where drones, artificial intelligence, hypersonic strikes, and a state's ability to scale up weapons production faster than the enemy play a decisive role. That is precisely why the Commander-in-Chief emphasizes, you do not negotiate with the weak. Conditions for peace are created only by strength.
This applies to both ballistic and cruise missiles. It's about producing enough missile weaponry. This concerns both ballistic and cruise missiles, and the use of the latest types of weapons, such as laser weapons, and moving to a new level of equipping the armed forces, which will allow us to reduce the direct involvement of people in combat operations and increase the participation of machines. First and foremost, this means drone systems. And of course, the further development of artificial intelligence.
First and foremost, it's drone systems and, of course, the further development of artificial intelligence. Essentially, Ukraine is betting on the war of the future, where the decisive factor is not the size of the army, but technology, the economy, and the ability to adapt more quickly. According to Zelensky, it is precisely in this that Ukraine has real grounds to count on turning the tide of the war.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
In the Pokrovsk battle, the Ukrainian armed forces are breaking the enemy's backbone. Ukrainian drones have turned the occupiers' lives into hell. The collapse of Putin's plans in Donbass. Ukrainian heavenly punishers have carried out a true disposal of enemy equipment and infantry. A fiery welcome awaits every invader. What is happening on these and other sections of the front? Watch. About 50 combat clashes in a single day. These are the indicators of the intensity of the enemy's offensive in the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad agglomeration area, as announced by the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. Despite the enemy's persistence, Syrsky notes the professionalism, composure, and dedication of Ukrainian soldiers who are thwarting Russian plans to break through the western lines of Donetsk.
This specific geographical region is characterized by its diverse landscape and unique environmental features. It encompasses a wide variety of natural terrains, ranging from rolling hills to fertile plains, all of which contribute to the area's distinct ecological identity and rich heritage. An attempt to take direct control of the locations held by Ukraine's defense forces.
The operators of the defense forces are always happy to warm up the enemy during this cold winter. The Ukrainian armed forces assure that no one will escape a fiery welcome. Ukrainian drone operators are destroying the enemy on the approaches to the city and directly in Pokrovsk itself.
The occupiers are trying to grow by expanding the theater of military operations. They are trying to stretch the efforts of Ukraine's defense forces at the moment when operational reserves are being deployed. In addition, the occupiers are using the tactic of assaults with mechanized columns.
In this video, a Ukrainian kamikaze drone flies into a group of Russian assault troops who had stopped to rest near Pokrovsk. Another recent target of the enemy has been Vovchansk. After suffering defeat near Kupiansk, the occupiers decided to change the direction of their breakthrough.
Ukraine's defense forces are carrying out successful operations to prevent the capture of this settlement and accordingly the commanding heights. In addition, the occupiers were forced to acknowledge the presence of Ukraine's defense forces within Vovchansk itself. In other words, all statements about the settlement being under full control as claimed by the Russian dictator do not correspond to reality.
The Russians are also showing interest toward Huliaipol in the Zaporizhzhia region.
This is their so-called tactic. 1,000 cuts, meaning they try to attack simultaneously along the entire length of the Russian-Ukrainian front. Let me remind you, its length is about 1,200 kilometers. The main goal of this tactic is to divert the operational reserves of the General Staff of Ukraine's defense forces from the main direction of the Russian offensive. And that is the Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka front. In addition, the occupiers are trying through such actions to create the illusion of a breakthrough on secondary sectors of the Russian-Ukrainian front.
Russia and Ukraine, with the mediation of the IAEA, have agreed to a local ceasefire in the area of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in order to begin repairs on the last remaining backup power line. How long the ceasefire will last is unknown. The level of trust that the Russian side has built for itself.
For more of this and other smart news from the front, tune in to the next episode.